Over to Doug Polk. Woo-wee! He blasted. Doug Polk puts in a monstrous raise. Hello everyone, I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com. We're back today with another hand from the High Stakes Heads-Up Feud between Doug Polk and Dale Negreanu. Spoiler alert, one of these two players is about to lose $40,000. Let's see who it's going to be. In this hand, Doug Polk raises it up. Dale Negreanu calls with the Queen 3 suited. You may say, Queen 3 suited? That's how you lose $40,000. Don't call raises with Queen 3 suited. Well, if that's your thought process, you would be wrong. Make sure you check out the completely free downloadable GTO preflop charts at pokercoaching.com/HUNL. And while you're at it, do me a favor. If you like these videos, click the like and subscribe button below. Thank you very much. All right, we see the flop. Ace, 10, 6. Dale Negreanu checks. Doug Polk bets. You may say, what cards does Doug Polk have? Well, it turns out whenever you're playing poker, while your cards matter, you also want to be concerned with what you are doing with your entire range. We are not just playing one particular hand, we're playing our entire range. And in this scenario, let's take a look at the range Doug Polk should play. So as we see here, in this spot, Doug Polk should be continuation betting actually somewhat infrequently on Ace 10 6. This is a board where Negreanu's range is actually like kind of reasonable, and he's going to be able to continue against a lot of bets. So when Doug Polk bets in this scenario, he's going to want to use a mix of big bet sizes, as we see here with his mostly very strong hands, and then some gut shot straight draw type hands, right? It's kind of neat to see. And then he's going to use a smaller bet size with just a smattering of good hands, garbage hands, etc. And so he's using the small bet size here. And folds, or I'll back around to Negreanu. What should Negreanu do with his Queen 3 of clubs? I think this is a spot where you can either raise or call, because assuming Doug Polk is using roughly the GTO strategy of betting smaller with just a whole smattering of stuff, you'll see that Negreanu does get to raise with some hands, mainly his best hands, and some hands that have equity when called, and just a few total nonsense bluffs. Whenever you are check raising your opponent, usually a range contains the nuts, draws to pretty strong hands, and some just total garbage. So let's take a look at this. Notice here, what are the nuts? Well, sets and two pairs are the nuts, right? Notice a set of sixes raises every time. Negreanu does not have pocket tens because he would have 3-bet that before the flop, right? Make sure you follow the charts. He does have ace 10 though. You see ace 10 raises the majority of the time. Ace 6 raises a pretty good chunk of the time. 10-6 raises a lot, so a lot of the good hands are raising. We also see ace jack raising, which is a pretty strong hand too. Fine, so the best hands are obviously raising a large chunk of the time. What are the draws? Well, the draws here are going to be hands like flush draws and gut shot straight draws that don't really have a whole lot of showdown values, like 9-7, 9-8, and 8-7. There you go. My brain isn't working. So we see 8-7 raising some, 9-7 raising some, 9-8 raising some, right? Also, we see these little slivers of red here. These are all flush draws that are raising some portion of the time. You do not want to raise every time with your flush draws. And the solver is actually kind of tough to predict what it's going to do with specific flush draws. Sometimes you see it raising the king high. Sometimes you see it raising the weaker ones. Here's raising the weaker ones, you see? Notice all the king high flush draws actually opt to check call. There are no raises with this king X suited, right? Whereas we see Queen 3 suited raising some portion of the time. That is what Negreanu does. And then you see some sporadic stone bluffs opting to raise. Not very many, but sometimes you will see this. And take a look at this, right? Like pocket twos. Randomly check raises the flop every once in a while. King 2 offsuit. Check raises the flop every once in a while. Queen 8 offsuit. Jack 8 offsuit. These hands opt to raise every once in a while. And these are the bluffs that most players, even very strong players, myself included, miss a large chunk of the time. All right. Negreanu check raises around to Doug Polk. He elects to call. One thing we studied a lot here is how to play against check raises. We are reviewing most of the hands where we play big pots because that's when we get to see the showdowns, and that's where often a lot of educational content happens. And one thing we've noticed consistently is when you get check raised on the flop, you do not have much of a re-raising range, roughly 100 big blinds deep, like Negreanu is. So take a look at this. Doug Polk's strategy involves basically no raising. You may say, don't you want to re-raise and just get it all in with your ace king? It's probably good. Well, it is probably good. And against Negreanu's range, it's actually in very good shape. But if you re-raise, what's going to give you action? Well, you make all the garbage draws fold, and you make all the weaker flush draws fold, but you're going to get action from this whole pile of ace-10 here. Do you really want to be getting it in with ace-king against ace-10 on the ace-10-6 board? The answer is no. So when you get action, it's mostly from the really, really nut hands. And notice that Polk does not re-raise with something like pocket 10s all that often, or pocket aces, or pocket 6s, even though there's a tiny sliver. You can effectively ignore them because it's 0.5% of the time. This is a spot where he really just is not raising at all because he wants to keep Negreanu in with all of his marginal made hands, draws, junk, etc. Sometimes you can get outdrawn, and that's okay. And that's how the coolers happen. All right. Doug Polk calls. As you see, he's going to be calling with a pretty wide range here. He's really just calling like a whole lot of pairs, right? Do any pairs fold? Let's take a look at the 10s. All the 10s look like they call. What about the 6s? The majority of 6s call besides the weakest ones. Notice like 9-6 starts to fold some portion of the time. 9-6 and worse folds. Kind of interesting to see pocket 4s, 3s, and 2s actually calls for Doug Polk. It's a little bit interesting to see. Notice 7s, 8s, 9s, all those hands call the flop, check raise as well. And that's what you have to do if you're playing against a good, strong opponent who's going to put you in pretty tough spots by raising with their draws and some total junk. You just can't fold too often. All of these suited hands that are continuing are flush draws. Okay. What about 9-7 offsuit? We see 9-7 offsuit calling. You really call the check raise in this scenario with 9-7 offsuit? Well, you should be if you're playing against a good opponent. All right, we go to the turn. Turn is the Gin card for down Negreanu. He makes the second nuts. It's usually pretty good. And he goes for a third pot bet. Tiny bet. I'm kind of surprised to see such a small sizing. But if we take a look at what the solver does, it actually does go for this small sizing. You may say, why go for the small sizing here? I suppose it turns out in this scenario, whenever all of your nut hands are still pretty good, like ace-10, right? Notice ace-10 still betting the turn. Ace-6, pocket 6s, all these are still betting even on this 3-flush turn. This is a scenario where you can be pretty happy betting those hands because, your opponent does have some flush draws, but not a ton. Going back to Polk's strategy here, you see he just has all sorts of stuff that, like, pocket 6s and ace-10 are still in good shape against. And also, you want to bet small to keep him in with your flushes because all those hands are drawing thin. So essentially, Negreanu's strong hands on the flop are still pretty strong, and a lot of his draws just got upgraded to premium hands. And we do see like pocket 2 still bluffing here, king 2 offsuit still bluffing here, queen 8, where's that? Yeah, queen 8 still bluffs now that it picked up a draw. So lots and lots and lots of betting on this turn, only checking about 30% of the time. But we do see some larger bets for 2/3 pot being used, and that's going to be used with flushes almost entirely, I have to imagine. As we see here, little slivers. I know it's kind of difficult to see. But we see little slivers of flush draws betting on the bigger side and some bluffs like 9-8 offsuit betting on the bigger side. Over to Doug Polk. Woo-wee! He blasted. Doug Polk puts in a monstrous raise. Holy moly, what should you do this with? All right, this is a spot where I think we can all learn a lot because it's pretty clear you want to be raising with your best hands in your draws, right? So what are the best hands for Doug Polk in this scenario? That's going to be pocket 10s. Those are pretty good. Pocket 6s, that's pretty good. Flushes are pretty good, right? Mostly the high flushes in case you happen to be against a lower flush from Negreanu. We see pair plus flush draw, interestingly enough, going for a raise in this here sometimes. We see pocket queens raising, which is kind of a neat hand, right? You really raising the pocket queens here? I know I probably wouldn't have before I watched this, before I studied this. We also see hands like these are going to be flushes most likely. So these are going to be good hands. But let's take a look at some of these bluffs that opt to raise. So we already saw pocket queens, which, is at least justifiable. Pocket queens with a queen of clubs on a 3 club board is pretty good. But what about pocket 4s, 3s, and 2s? Are you raising pocket 4s, 3s, and 2s in this spot? I know I'm sure not. But it turns out you're supposed to raise pocket 4s, 3s, and 2s with a club in this scenario. Take a look at these hands. Pocket or 6-5 offsuit, 6-4 offsuit with a club. Also opts to raise. So this is one of these bizarre scenarios where even against a strong polarized range, you should be raising some chunk of the time with more than just your best hands and your quote-unquote draws. Interestingly enough, we see like king of clubs 10 just calling, right? King of clubs queen for a straight. All the straights, just call, right? Ace king with the king of clubs, just calling. So we see Polk is using an incredibly polarized strategy here of queen high flushes, king high flushes, some weaker flushes, right? And then just some absolute nonsense like 6-5, 6-4, 4s, 3s, and 2s, plus some sets and whatnot. So pretty neat strategy, right? Gets back around to Daniel Negreanu. What in the world does he do with this queen 3 of clubs? I want you to pause the video and write in the comment section below what you would do. Would you fold it? It's probably not the right answer, but we'll see. Would you fold it? Would you call? Would you re-raise the minimum? Or would you go all in? Pause the video below and type in your answer. Okay, did you do it? This is a situation where when you get raised, I do not think you want to have much of an all-in range. Why, you might say? Well, go back over here and think about this. In this scenario, Doug Polk's turn raising strategy is really nut heavy. You don't want to be raising into a range that has a whole lot of nut hands that are just obviously not folding, right? And you may say, don't I want to stack the 9 high flushes? Sure you do, but there really aren't a ton of those in the range. So this is a spot where I think Negreanu should mostly just call, and it turns out he should call 97% of the time. He does get to raise every once in a while with some flushes, so some flushes do opt to go in. Notice the lower flushes actually opt to go all in some portion of the time. That's because I suppose you don't want to get outdrawn by the random king high club draws and whatnot, right? So we see a smattering of bluffs all in here, and then we see queen 9 and queen 8. Gotta presume with a club, actually jamming some portion of the time too. That said, this is one of these spots where you are going to be raising almost never, right? So given you should be raising almost never, I think it's probably fine just to call with everything in your range. You're probably not giving up all that much equity. That said, if you did want to develop a perfectly GTO strategy here, you see you should be raising with some flushes, all in, and you want to be raising with some total airball bluffs with the queen of clubs. Negreanu does call. He's going to check every hand on the river. He checks. Doug Polk shoves all the money in. Are you ready? Prepare yourselves. Someone is about to get coolered. Get nice and warm. What should Doug Polk shove with in this scenario? Well, let's take a look. Doug Polk's shoving strategy should be king high flushes, queen high flushes, 9 high flushes, 8 high flushes, 7 high flushes, all of his flushes. And then some bluffs. What bluffs does Doug Polk use here? Well, me, as a mere mortal, would literally never go all in this scenario with pocket 4s, pocket 3s, and pocket 2s. Or 6-4. Weird 6-4 is like 2 pair now. 6-5 shove sometimes too. Pocket queens shove sometimes too as a bluff. Pocket 9s shove sometimes as a bluff. 9-8, 8-7 shove sometimes, well, all the time they have it as a bluff. I would literally never shove pocket 4s, 3s, and 2s here. I don't think I ever have pocket 4s, 3s, and 2s here. And, like, I've studied this kind of spot, right? So if reasonable players are not finding bluffs in this scenario, this is a spot where you should be drastically overfolding when your opponent wants to put it in because their all-in range really is just good flushes. Now, Negreanu has a little bit of a problem here, and that is that he beats all the flushes besides the king high ones, right? So this is a spot where he just cannot fold this hand. And if we look at the GTO strategy for Negreanu, we see he's actually supposed to call with all the flushes. And he's supposed to call with ace 10, ace jack, right? These are going to be 2 pairs. These are very strong hands. Pocket 6s is a set, but you see it's actually indifferent, right? It calls about half the time and folds about half the time. 10-6 calls every once in a while. I got to presume when that has the 10 of clubs. Notice ace 6 actually folds every time unless, well, it folds basically every time, right? So ace 6 is folding. Notice actually though, ace 7, ace 8 call, which is kind of neat to see. If they have the club, I got to presume. Turns out having a club is really important here. So anyway, this is a spot where Negreanu has to call it off with all of the flushes for sure and a few of the 2 pairs. I know that I've said Doug Polk seems to like to overbluff a decent amount of the time, but whenever overbluffing means finding bluffs with some really random hands like pocket 2s, 3s, 4s, and 6-5, I'm not sure he actually overbluffs in this spot. So if he does not overbluff in this spot, I definitely think a hand like ace-6 needs to be folded. I would not find hero calls in the spot against him with that. This is a spot where I would just try to stick closer to the solver and maybe even overfold a little bit compared to what the solver recommends. That said, don't fold flushes. Flushes are great. Call, collect the money. Oh.
And end up literally with my sausage in my hand. My beefy sausage just sitting in my hand, and that's all I got. It's just a in my hands by the river.
This time Negreanu loses. Well, maximum cooler, such is life. Sometimes you're going to lose. But really, I wanted to focus in today on finding these bluffs. These are the bluffs on the turn that almost no one finds that I'm going to presume Doug Polk knows to find. And yeah, it's always bad when you run into the queen high flush, but quite often you're not going to run into the queen high flush. You're going to be running into stuff like two pair that's going to fold and top pairs that are going to fold, and you're going to print a lot of equity. This time though, he has the nuts and life is easy. If you want to study how to play your entire range, make sure you check out my training site, pokercoaching.com. Every month, I go through a very in-depth exercise with my students where I ask them how they would play every hand in their range. And I can tell you, nobody would have check raised, or nobody would have raised the turn here with pocket twos. And that's something we would have all learned together. So make sure you are actively learning all the time, and that is what we offer you at pokercoaching.com. You can actually get a free trial membership at pokercoaching.com/free. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed this hand. If you did, do me a favor, click the like and subscribe button below and the notification bell. Ding, ding, ding. Good luck in your games. I hope you sidestep all the coolers, unless, of course, you're coolering your opponent. Have a great day, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more strategy lessons, pre-flop charts, and interactive quizzes, make sure you get your free membership to pokercoaching.com right now at pokercoaching.com/free. I'll talk to you next time.